Arteta! What a strike! What a screamer! Zola! And a fantastic goal! Arsenal back in it! And here's Liverpool, lines it up, finds the net. Arsenal are in front.
Arsenal proved they're ready for the test of Liverpool with narrow 2-1 victory over League One Blackpool with 10 men. This is the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast. My name is Elliot Smith, and you can block me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner. That's right. If Arsenal can beat League One Blackpool down to 10 men, there's no telling what we can do to Liverpool when they rock up at the Emirates at the weekend. But we'll discuss that. We'll discuss the Blackpool game, and we will discuss Aaron Ramsey's contract, which I believe is in Ivan Gazidis' carry-on luggage on his way to Milan. So maybe we'll get Gazidis on to talk about that a little bit. But before he comes on to join us, let's talk to Paul. You can find him on Twitter at Pausing in My Pants. Hello, Paul.
Woohoo!
Yeah, and Tim's on Twitter at Stroberto. Hello, Tim.
Hello there.
Neither Clive nor Scott will be on this podcast, so please leave us a 5-star review. Write nasty things about them anywhere. Yeah, scribble them on your bathroom wall if you want to. It's fine. Take a picture, send it to us. In any event, a couple of things. So Tim will have a match preview for the Liverpool game on Patreon, which you should sign up for. And if you don't sign up for it, we still love you and thank you anyway. We have a new sponsor. We announced it online. You will be hearing their promotion begin in November, because it's November technically today, but we're going to start that with the post-Liverpool match. So there you go. And the big news. The winner of the shirt competition. It is officially November, so we can officially announce the winner of the shirt competition, and that winner is Alan Wayne. Alan Wayne has won the Arsenal shirt of his choosing. We will be reaching out to you, Alan, on email. Woohoo! Paul told me that was the most exciting news of his day before we came on. He said, I care more about who wins this shirt than I do about anything I've done today. So, Paul, very excited for Alan. Tim, I believe, is equally excited for Alan. Alan Wayne, you are the shirt winner. Okay, enough of that. Tim, so good to have you back on. I've been having to talk to Paul and Clive and Scott. This is a nice change of pace. So I'm really happy. You got to see a thrill-a-minute game at the Emirates. Maybe not so much in the first half. Second half got a little more interesting than we might have liked. This was the lineup I was kind of hoping to see. Full rotation, really. A really all change ahead of Liverpool. It didn't really end that way. We can come to that. But as far as the way the coach approached this game, pretty much spot on, right?
Yeah, I think so. Even some of the players who might play on Saturday, I think you can make a case for all of them. If Bellerin's not fit and we have to play Lichtsteiner, then he could probably do with the minutes. Mustafi at centre-back, if he has to play on Saturday, which I really hope he doesn't, then that's fine. He's a centre-back. That's not going to cause too many conniptions. And yeah, I think the starting lineup was pretty much exactly what I expected. I think I didn't know which way round he'd put the fullbacks, but I guess it makes a certain amount of sense because basically Jenkinson has no future at Arsenal, so there's not really the need to accommodate him in the same way. And like I said, if Lichtsteiner's needed at right back on Saturday, then it's best we play him there, really. As for the rest of it, I know a few of my friends kind of expressed disappointment that these games nowadays don't have more youngsters, back like they used to perhaps 10 years ago. And I kind of understand that because that made the competition a bit more exciting. And actually, I think those young teams had a bit more cohesion together largely because they were playing together kind of in the junior teams. But I first of all, the squad's a bit older now. So our squad players are players like Mkhitaryan and like Lichtsteiner. But also when you look back at some of those old League Cup teams, most of them didn't actually make it anyway. And so what we've basically done, we played Plegi. I won't try and doing the disservice of trying to pronounce his name.
To be fair, mispronunciations are sort of the brand here, but okay.
I actually watched it on a French channel, and they really don't know how to pronounce. I mean, they pronounce Guendouzi, but they pronounce Pleguezuela. So yeah, they're hypocrites.
And the French are famously very tolerant of mispronunciation.
They are, yeah. Love it.
I mean, we played him because we kind of had to, really, didn't we? Because we don't have many centre backs. I think he's 20 maybe at the moment, so I'm not sure he has much of a future. Maybe 21, yeah. But basically we got Maitland-Niles in. I'm not really sure why we played him on the right. I'm not sure how useful that was. I think there were other players who could have gone out there. And you know, the young player that's really got a shot is Emile Smith-Rowe, and he got another game, he got another goal. You know, that would be invaluable to him. I guess the big kind of question is over Eddie Nketiah, really, who's not getting a look in even in these games. And you'd think that either he doesn't have a future or he really needs to go out on loan soon. So I thought the lineup was fine. Maybe the bench surprised me a little bit. But then again, I think, you know, we've spoken a lot on this podcast about this kind of increased democracy and, you know, keeping players topped up with minutes and treating every game like a democracy. So, and I don't think any of the players we brought on are going to be particularly knackered.
I mean, we can come to that because I have feelings, as you might imagine. We'll come on to that. But I was maybe slightly surprised by the personnel on the bench. But then again, that's because, you know, I've been programmed into Arsene Wenger's approach into this competition. So we'll see. But yeah, I thought the starting lineup was what I expected and kind of what I wanted. Yeah, and I agree with that. And we can come to the substitutions and the wisdom of how they were used. I think the fact is, with Nketiah, maybe it is just a case of you've got Welbeck, Aubameyang, and Lacazette, and Emery wants to get each of them a chance at some point to play through the middle to maintain sharpness in that role, and that's a priority to him over getting Nketiah some time. But if that's the case, he's got to go out somewhere. I mean, he has to be playing right now. So, you know, Paul, one of the things that I mentioned on Twitter, not everybody reacted to it super positively, which is going to come as a huge surprise, is just watching Guendouzi on the pitch with 18-year-old Smith-Rowe, 21-year-old Maitland-Niles, 21 Pleggy or 21 Pleggy, and obviously Guendouzi, 19. I think this, to me, is such a stark reminder of the difference between, you know, a hot prospect who we kind of hope gets a role in the team at some point and maybe becomes a part of the first team, and a guy who looks like a star in the making. I think some people believe that I am going too far in my praise for Guendouzi and what he has done at Arsenal so far, and maybe it is a little over the top. I think he
makes
looks
a pleasant change from you, so keep bringing it.
I've got to save my anger and frustration for other players. So Guendouzi is concerned, I'm just balancing that out. But to me, I watch him and I see a player who looks like he belongs in a first team at a big club, if not starting every match, certainly capable of starting and capable of influencing a game. And the assist he provided was absolutely brilliant. And he had a couple other brilliant passes in the game. His vision of the pitch is so incredible. But watching him now and thinking of how we've rated players down the years, all of these prospects that we've had from, Chips Vela and, now Maitland-Niles and Nketiah and Smith-Rowe. And, we can go through the names Chuck Saniki and Benikafobi. Is Guendouzi the clearest example, the more you watch him, especially on the pitch with other players that are really his contemporaries age-wise, of the difference between a young star and a young prospect?
Yeah. Now, I thought the other lads actually did pretty well this
game.
But,
okay.
And we can get into that.
Sure. Well, I'd like to handle that too while you're at it. Why not?
Yeah. But I thought Guendouzi, I've liked what he's done, and sometimes he's looked really good, and sometimes he's looked just okay at the senior level, which is a compliment in itself anyway. The boy's only 19. I thought he really popped in this game. He ran the show. It was a lot of responsibility. The midfield was all his. And he had his head up, picking passes, who's been aggressive with the passing. I thought he was really good in this. Shame about the red card and not being available for Liverpool.
Yeah, and by the way, that has been cleared up. He is not available for Liverpool. Everybody had a bit of a mare on Twitter, at least, trying to determine the rule. Well, I had it right initially, then got talked out of it, then back. But he is banned for Liverpool.
Yeah, you were blown in the wind both ways every 5 minutes.
Thanks for reminding
embarrassing
me. Thought I handled that already.
Performance. Yeah. But I tweeted once on it.
And you were correct.
And I was correct.
Well, so before we move on from you, did you think Maitland-Niles and Smith-Rowe did well? Obviously Smith-Rowe got a goal that he didn't really hit as cleanly as he might like, but they all go in, they all count. But I thought they both struggled to influence the game.
Nah, I thought... No, so here's what I think. I think pretty much everybody played pretty decently, nobody clicked. I mean, I watched first time round, I thought it was ugly. Second time round, I'm like, well, what was this guy doing and what was that guy doing? Ramsey and Mkhitaryan, for example, made runs all day long. Nobody was really finding them. I think everybody was at least okay, with the exception. I mean, Carl was a bit hit and miss, but he was below par for me.
Or at the par that's par for him.
Yeah, and Cech clearly had a bit of a mirror. I think actually everybody else did pretty well, but it was only the Carabao Cup and Blackpool, so you got to dial it back a few notches. I thought Emile Smith-Rowe was really good. That might not be a popular opinion. And for the goal, look, one thing I compare him to Ramsey-wise is he's, at least at this age, not afraid to get into the box, into those positions. And, Ramsey's scuffed a few of his own into the back of the net. He's not always the cleanest finisher anyway in terms of conversion rate. So a player with the legs he has who'll get up and back and into that spot in the box, I mean, he overruns it going to meet it like on the goal line, then realizes it's not come across and drops into a little pocket. So I think it's all fine and good, even as a bit of a something of a miss hit. So I thought he was pretty good. But and I thought Maitland-Niles looked pretty good. He was played not in, well, he could play that position if he got more time at it. I'm sure Tim can correct this if it's off, but he's played plenty of the wing in his youth as a youth player. I think he did pretty good. He put in some nice two or three nice whipped crosses. He showed his legs. He showed his athleticism. I thought it was all fine. As a game, it was ugly, so we assume all the players were ugly within it. But I think the individual performances just didn't click together. That was my feeling on it. But Guendouzi popped. I mean, I've gotten used to him being somewhere between decent and good at the senior level, and this game he just popped for me.
Well, and this is the thing, and Tim, so maybe you can come in on the Maitland-Niles Smith-Rowe thing briefly, is that this is League One opposition at home, and I realize they're going to be a little bit more defensive and that can pose problems, but this is where young players are supposed to pop so they can make their argument for more playing time. And if ever there was a competition that became a platform for players to prove their worth at Arsenal, this competition was it under Arsene Wenger. I think for me, I would have liked to have seen more from either Smith-Rowe or Maitland-Niles to say that they're taking that step closer to the first team. And I think Guendouzi probably was our best performer on the night at some level. So, for you, when you look at a player like Maitland-Niles in particular, who's 21 and felt so close to making a breakthrough and then had injuries and had other setbacks, is this a disappointment in terms of the progress you'd like him to be making?
No, I agree with what Paul said, actually, in terms of the clickage. First of all, it's not a team that plays together very often. So, he's kind of... Smith-Rowe looked a lot better in the Europa League game, I think, where... I think it was a slightly stronger team. Also, I think going forward, that's not a very creative forward line. Excuse me. So, Ramsey's back in the double pivot, and he was very disciplined, but we know that's not really his strength. Creation, Maitland-Niles on the right, and then Mkhitaryan on the left, who I felt was pretty. I just don't. A bit like Iwobi on the right. I don't really like Mkhitaryan on the left. I think he should play on the right. Here. Yeah, and then Welbeck up front. I mean, it's a pretty workmanlike forward line, and it put a lot of the emphasis, I think, on Smith-Rowe to be the creative player. It was almost like, right, you're in for Ozil, and not only are you in for Ozil, but there's no Iwobi here. There's no secondary creator. So I felt like that was slightly tough on him. With Maitland-Niles, Paul's right. Maitland-Niles spent a season on the right wing at Ipswich. And I happen to think that he could be a decent ish backup right back. But it slightly worried me that I thought when I saw the lineup would see Maitland-Niles in the double pivot, Ramsey in the number 10, and Smith-Rowe on the right. That's what I was expecting to see, and it slightly worried me that he put. Well, I wouldn't say worried me, but I think it should slightly worry Maitland-Niles, perhaps, that he was the one who was really put out of position. Whereas Smith Rowe was like given the number 10 role, which I think was a bit too much given what he had around him. But that's quite a show of faith. I said earlier in the pod that, we put Jenkinson at left back because essentially we don't really care about him or his future, and it was just a body. And I kind of felt like Maitland-Niles on the right is the same thing. I appreciate we gave him a new contract this summer, but I really don't think any of the new contracts that were dished out this summer were like affirmative shows of faith in those players. I think it was asset protection. And the fact that I appreciate he's just come back from injury, but it almost felt like we put Maitland-Niles on the right because the manager doesn't really care about him, when it would have been very easy to play him in his favoured position. And he kind of moved, he played Ramsey there. In fact, there'd be, for me, much more of an argument for playing Ramsey on the right and Maitland-Niles in the centre.
Yep.
Yeah, because we don't have to care about Aaron Ramsey anymore. So,
at a minimum, you could say that's a position he could audition to play a little bit with the first team before he's gone. I mean, it's him or Mkhitaryan for that position. Iwobi doesn't really work there. I would have liked to have seen if in this system he can be that right side solution.
Yeah, agreed. And, we've seen Ramsey play well on the right before, and I've always thought that's a decent enough position for him, but obviously he feels differently. But again, we don't have to care what he thinks anymore. We're not investing in his future. So, and he's a decent professional. I don't think he'd kick up too much fuss if we stuck him on the right. But yeah, so I thought Maitland-Niles was okay, given that he was, that wasn't really so at Ipswich he played on the right of a midfield four, and that's not really what this was. And I don't think it was really going to get the best out of him, particularly when he hadn't played a full senior game for a few months. So if I were him, I would perhaps be a little bit worried about how the manager views me. Smith Rowe, I think, Smith Rowe, it was, if we take the context away of the fact that he's an 18-year-old who was playing in the under-18s last season, then it was, it was a 6 out of 10 performance. But he still got a goal. He got in a position to get the goal, so he did what we put him in there to do, effectively, to either create or score a goal. And the manager played him in a position that has a lot of responsibility. And he, even if he didn't, his performance wasn't amazing, he came up with some end products. So I think he can be positive about his night. Maitland-Niles, I'd be a bit worried if I were him. Yeah,
and to be fair, I mean, you can look at Reece Nelson, who I thought, when he played for the first team the last couple seasons, just failed to impress. I knew he was a bright young talent from what everyone who watched the youth teams say, but I had never really seen it. And then he goes to Germany and gets a chance to play in positions he wants to play in, and he's off to a fantastic start to life there. So, maybe we just have to pump the brakes. Well, I say I have to pump the brakes on drawing conclusions about a player like Maitland-Niles or Smith Rowe until they do get a chance to be played in positions where they want to play in teams that are a little more cohesive. I think I would have liked to have seen a little more pop here. And again, it is a League One team at home. So, even if you're in a more workmanlike team against this level of opposition, the players can hopefully show something. It makes you wonder if the 4-2-3-1 makes any sense without Ozil, because so far this season, we haven't found any player who can play the number 10 position in this system effectively other than Ozil. And the thing that scares me a little bit, Paul, I want to come on to the Ramsey thing here in a second, but just one thing. You look at patterns of play and repetition of problems within the Emery system, and one of them is just this disconnect between central midfield and that trio of attackers behind the striker, the three behind the one, and how disconnected they get and how much we struggle to build up through the central positions of the pitch anyway. We had that problem in this game. Now you could say, well, it's the lineup, it's the lack of cohesion, but there seems to be a theme developing here about how the center of midfield and that front 3-4 connect. And it seems to be a bit of a problem. I mean, do you think it's a reach to see that in this game given the lineup, or do you think it's fair to start to worry about that as a flaw in the system a little bit?
No, I think it's a worry in the system at the moment. To me, I mean, we can go through the names of the midfielders and we realize there's an issue. Torreira looks like a lock. Guendouzi is manfully doing that second pivot, if we want to call it that. But at the age of 19, some games he's going to look very vanilla for us. It's just the way it is. He's doing great. he's a talent. Some days he looks great. Some days he'll just look okay. I think the two of them were a fine unit, a fine feisty unit in the game against Palace, but maybe we didn't create as much from those positions as we might have liked. So I thought Guendouzi had a good game, but it was a big ask for him to really not only have a good game in midfield, but knit us to Ozil and the front four. And beyond those two, we have Xhaka, who's a really good heads-up passer, given the extra yard, but struggles in every other department. And Ramsey hasn't been regarded as a viable second pivot for some time. So where did that leave us? It left us with Torreira and issues with every other player who would partner him, one of whom may turn out to be the real deal. But even though we've effectively got two new midfielders who are playing lots of minutes for us this season, we're at least one more midfielder away, competing for those two pivot spots before we can reliably and consistently churn out a midfield that knits defence, midfield and attack together. I mean, look at the number of bloody midfielders Liverpool have at this stage. They got 5 or 6, none of whom are a 10, if you want to put it like that, who can swivel into every game and keep a level of intensity and impact that we can only dream of at the moment.
Well, so here's the question then, Paul. Stay with just for 1 second. Is it time to maybe question whether the system can work with this team for the foreseeable future? I mean, at what point do you say I'd rather see him adjust?
Well, I mean, one difficulty is we've kept winning, but I think that's a false read to some degree. Probably should have been a lot more draws along the way over the last 10, 11 games. So I think we're pretty close to having to make an adjustment to the system. I mean, even our scenario that 4-2-3-1 only works with Ozil depends on whether you think it works with Ozil. So,
well, no, that's a fair point. Yeah, it's a fair point, of course. And by the way, I mean, look, this is what's so difficult about, this is going to sound really weird, but difficult about winning a lot of games in sort of an unconvincing performances is that you don't want to fix what ain't broke, but it might be broke. You know what I mean?
And you need the team buy-in. If you're going to ask them to do things that are somewhat unnatural to them, I mean, they'll do it for a game or two, but if they also start losing, now you have players who don't know why you're asking them to do things that seem unnatural or wrong, and you're losing. So it's who'd be a coach? Well, I would. Yeah. They pay you 5 or 6 or 7 million quid, whether you're shit
I don't mind
or
getting
not.
sacked after 6 months. It's about time I can buy out my contract.
Yeah, so it's a precariously balanced situation at the moment where you wonder, do we have enough to even keep our current formation running with any changes in personnel? And we haven't really tested it against the big boys yet, but I think we're suspicious that we may be found a little short when we play Liverpool or whoever. There's probably a reason they say the manager will need 3 or 4 windows to have the personnel that he believes in. I parroted that at the start of the season, but I kind of felt we had enough good players for us to be at least close. But maybe that's just how it is. I mean, we've seen the number of players. Some clubs hit it pretty quick. Chelsea have, but they have a title-winning team from 2 seasons ago, and they got probably the magic position for them. Bring in Jorginho. Which was the dream for Sarri, and they're off and clicking. So, but we're not them. We're probably 2 or 3 different versions of teams now, and a few windows away. So I think we
got to screw up at least 3 or 4 more windows before we settle into mid-table. So, kidding, it's a joke. Nobody send the hate mail to Scott. Tim, I have 2 questions for you. One, just really quickly on Guendouzi. Watching this game, I'm starting to get the sense that he's a little more of a creative player than I thought when he gets close to goal. The assist was really, really brilliant. He had a couple other brilliant passes in the final third. He just has a really good eye for the open man, and I wonder, as Ozil's time winds down in the next, maybe 3 seasons, and Guendouzi's getting into, that stage of his career where he can really be a feature in the first team, would you say that he could play more of that attacking 8, the modern 10, more like the Kevin De Bruyne 10? I'm not saying he's Kevin De Bruyne, but someone who can pick the ball up deeper, carry it forward, drive it in the attacking third, play a final ball, or look for his own shot. I mean, could we shift to a 4-3-3 with him in the middle of that midfield 3 in more of the De Bruyne role at the time we start to transition away from Ozil, looking in your crystal ball?
Yeah, I think so. I think he's obviously a very good progressive passer. So I've written about this in the column this week about, just like a little breakdown of
naturally
what indeed what has actually changed under Emery, and actually one of the areas was possibly too positive about, given the performances, but the area where you can see a plan is the midfield. He pretty much always has that double pivot, and he likes having a couple of progressive passes in there. So he likes having Xhaka and Torreira, and this is me completely speculating, but I think the only signing that had his fingerprints on it this summer was Guendouzi, and it's obviously because he saw him for one of those 2 positions, and he's another guy that does that kind of not necessarily risky, because that almost sounds reckless, but that progressive passing. But that said, one of the things I really like about Guendouzi is the comfort with which he takes the ball off the goalkeeper. I think he's one of the best players in our squad at that. He's one of the ones who really, really doesn't get the heebie-jeebies when the goalkeeper gives him the ball on the edge of our box. He gives a little look behind. He's nice and calm, and it doesn't take him, you don't get, a bit like so I think Xhaka looks calm when he picks up the ball in that position, but you can almost hear the beep, beep, Securicore vehicle is reversing when he kind of tries to get it on his left foot, whereas you don't get that with Guendouzi. It's, I can see him, he's 10 yards behind me, I don't care, I'll turn and off I go. And actually his passing in our half, I think, is very good and very valuable. So I don't have a strong opinion on it. I'm happy to see how it shakes out. I suppose a little bit like the discussion you and Paul just had. Do we wait until Emery buys the players that fit the system, or do we play the system that fits the players? Because to me, if you play the system that fits the players with this squad, you play 2 up front. That's where our strength is. And our best performance this season, for my money, absolutely without question, was Fulham when we played 2 up front. I think that's the kind of team we've got, but it's kind of the same with Guendouzi. I'm not in a rush to kind of say what he'll become. I like what I'm seeing now, and I think a lot of it will depend on how the team evolves and what the team needs.
Okay, so let's talk about the team evolving, and a big evolution of it is Ramsey and his departure. So. I mean, it's hard to know where the chicken and the egg are on this one. I mean, the egg is up the chicken's butt, and then it comes out of the chicken's butt. But like before that, I mean, I obviously
the rooster had sex with the chicken.
Yeah, and then the chicken poops out the egg, right? Just like how we make babies, right?
Yeah,
the woman
not me.
Poops out the baby. Anyway, that's how I understand it to work. And apropos of our future sponsor. In any event,
going.
So usually Paul throws in that last bit that I don't want in the podcast, but it was me this time.
I've been so good.
I know it's bizarre.
How you are about sponsors.
That's because you're waiting for the next episode when we launch it. Okay, so Tim, he looks bereft of. Confidence is such a squishy word, because who the hell knows if he's bereft of confidence? He's certainly bereft of any form. He is not playing well. I don't know if the system suits him. I don't know if the way he's being deployed suits him. I don't know if the contract issue is upsetting him. But there are really 2 issues to untangle here. One is just what you think of Ramsey, the player, right now, and what's going on with him on the pitch. But then 2 is, we got to dig into the news that broke. The news that's broken is Ramsey's been told he'll be let go of for free this summer, that he'll be allowed to leave for free. There will be no contract agreed to with him, that basically Gazidis wanted to sign him, and when Gazidis left, they immediately pulled the contract. Raul has gone on record this week basically saying, in the past we've been too naive, we've let players get into their last year when they've got 3 years left on their deal. You need to be looking to restructure. You should never be in this situation. So help me unpack this. And first of all, in terms of people saying, well, this is Ramsey and Ramsey's agent, and they screwed the club and they overplayed their hand, I don't necessarily see it that way. I'm curious to see where you come out on it.
No, I don't. I don't think they've overplayed their hand. He's going to go on a Bosman. They've played it absolutely superbly. They've taken us for mugs. I can give you a really quick answer on where Ramsey the player is, and it's nowhere, because he doesn't fit this team anymore. And I keep banging on about this, not to elucidate my own genius, but because
I'm happy to do it for you if you prefer.
But because it was so obvious that this was going to happen. I wrote in the last week of May that we should sell Ramsey, because let's have a little look at what's happened over the last 12 months. We got two £50 million strikers. We put £350,000 a week into Mesut Ozil, and we threw Mkhitaryan into the equation. You know, we absolutely overloaded our squad with attacking talent. So Ramsey became much more. Not only did he become a bit more dispensable, particularly when we have needs in other areas of the squad, and we didn't have the money to address those needs. We were scrabbling around for, was it Vida, the Croatian defender, who I don't even think is very good, in the last minute of the window, and then didn't do it because we basically couldn't afford him. You know, it to me, it was absolutely made business sense to sell Ramsey this summer, and to me it was just obvious he wasn't going to fit into this team. It's just completely obvious. We bought all these attackers. We don't need a midfielder anymore careering forward from the centre circle, because we've got a couple of 50 million strikers, and we've just, you know, put most of our budget for the next 5 years into, you know, a number 10. So it was just completely obvious, and it was completely obvious to me that he was going to struggle to fit in that framework. As for how Arsenal come out on this, I think extremely badly. It's the worst case scenario has happened. Maybe it doesn't matter whose fault it was. I think Arsenal, you know, there was something in the Telegraph yesterday about, like you just said, Gazidis wanted him to stay, but the new exec committee don't want him to. So that's the, you know, first of all, it's absolutely textbook to blame the guy who left yesterday.
I confess he did it.
Exactly. Did you ever see that? There's a Simpsons episode where Homer says, like, oh, always blame the guy that doesn't speak English. And it's kind of like that. It's like for the next kind of 3 months, it's like, oh yeah, that was Gazidis' fault, and it might well have been. But you know what? Raul Sanllehi was still here in the summer. This still happened on his watch. He was still watching this unfold. And I'm sorry if that is true, that, you know, Gazidis wanted it and now he's out the door, we don't anymore. Then why the fuck were you sitting on your hands in July and August with your mouth shut? And then all of a sudden, when he walks out the door, you decide to pipe up. What you do is you say, sorry, Ivan, you're fucking off in about 8 weeks, so I don't care what your opinion is on Aaron Ramsey's contract, because very shortly I'm going to run the show here. I don't think he should have a contract. And frankly, I'm the one who's going to have to pick up the consequences of this decision. So to just, it seems weird to me to just sit on your hands and wait for him to sneak out the back door, close the door and go, oh yeah, by the way, it was his fault. Raul Sanllehi was an employee of this club in a significant position. He was part of the executive committee. He might have a bigger role now, but he still had a big role in the summer. So for me, it's absolutely senseless to, you know, make this decision a few weeks after the window shuts. I can only think maybe they're trying to create a bit of a market in January, perhaps, but I'm not sure how likely that is either. But I think this is hopefully it is just a bit of a messy legacy thing, and we don't get any more of this going forward. But to me, it's a bad start for this executive committee, because they've shown, if what I think has been fed by the club is true, I don't think it reflects well on them that they didn't have the wherewithal to, you know, basically say, sorry, Ivan, your opinion doesn't really count anymore. And, you know, we're scrabbling around for players in other positions, and we've just kissed goodbye to, you tens of millions of pounds. And as for, people keep saying to me, oh, perhaps no one wanted him. Bollocks, absolute bollocks. Whenever a top player has 1 year left on his contract and you create a market for him, the deal always gets done, because they're the easiest transfers to do. They're the easiest because the selling club puts up almost no resistance. The player has been negotiating a salary or been in contract negotiations, so everyone knows what he wants. They're quick deals to do, which is why so many of these types of deals happen towards the end of the window.
Oxlade-Chamberlain ring a bell?
Exactly, yeah. The buying club comes in, the selling club wants to sell, so there's not much negotiation there. And the player and his representatives have been telling everyone what kind of salary they want for the last 6 months, so everyone knows it's, okay, you'll take this amount of money, the player will take this amount of money, thank you very much. And so if we can sell Oxlade-Chamberlain for 40 million at this stage of contract, we can sell Ramsey for 50 million plus, easy. And I think the way that Arsenal have handled this, and whoever's at fault and for whatever reason, basically they've got the worst case scenario. They've got a player who doesn't really fit into the team that we could have got lots of money for, who's basically probably going to sit on the bench for the rest of the season, and we're going to get nothing for him. It is absolutely the worst case scenario.
Yeah, I mean, it's bad. And let me give you this. Since 2014, Manchester City sales, they've received £240 million. Chelsea, £494 million. Tottenham, £225 million. Man United, £211 million. Liverpool, £442 million. Arsenal, £161 million. We are scared of selling. We are bad at selling. We don't sell when we have leverage. We are not prepared to sell players for whatever reason. Maybe Arsene Wenger felt it was a failure. It was admitting defeat.
Yeah.
Maybe it was to try to avoid the perception of being weak, being a selling club. Maybe it's, after the years of selling Nasri and Fabregas in the same window and losing Adebayor the way we did and losing Van Persie to United, that we just felt that selling in general projected weakness. Maybe it's the fact that we felt we could not attract appropriate replacements, which is an indictment of the recruiting then, because as we've seen with Lucas Torreira and even Matteo Guendouzi to some extent, there are players to be found that you've never heard of or didn't know much about. So I definitely think that's part of it. Paul, I want you to address... Well, I want you to address specifically what I tell you to address and not anything that you're interested in talking about. So let me give you a question, and then you can veer off into whatever interests you personally. What do you say to people who, as an excuse, or maybe excuse is too harsh, explanation, say maybe they just genuinely thought he would fit and they wanted Emery to get a chance with him because they trusted in the talent of the player. There was a contract agreed in principle, and then after a couple of games, it became clear to Emery that he wasn't going to fit, and they withdrew the contract. What do you say to that defense, that Emery deserved the chance to see if the player fit his system?
I think Emery came into a preloaded situation in which he was expected to have a plan for Ozil and Ramsey. And so he conjured up his best way of working with those players as something of a fixture. I think it was the working proposition within the club was they would find an agreement with Ramsey. I think Ramsey expected to hatch a deal with the club. It was taking a long time. I suspect the main disagreement was simply money, but they were getting closer on both sides. And I think Ramsey's reaction is a very personal reaction. I think, to me, it indicates, we're all reading the tea leaves. Who the fuck knows? To me, it indicates, actually, at the end of the day, he wants to stay at Arsenal. He wanted to stay at Arsenal. And that was his expectation. And I have sympathy for Tim's view that it looks weak that Sanlehi is now stepping up. I suspect during the summer he voiced his concerns. I suspect he was even stronger on the Arteta thing, which was, again, Gazidis' take. And the battle he chose to fight was he wanted Emery over Arteta, especially with the idea that Gazidis might be equivocating in terms of his future and going elsewhere. He's like, you're not fucking leaving us with Arteta. He's your idea. We want a coach going forward. We know we can work with within our philosophy, and that was the hill he died on. The Ramsey one, I'm sure he expressed his view, but wasn't going to die on that particular hill, whatever the politics are, though it does make it look a little weak, because within a week of the Ivan Gazidis confirmation that he's leaving, the Ramsey thing dies. It just looks to me like Sanlehi went into Emery and said, all right, we got to talk real turkey here before this goes any further. Is this how you want to spend your next 40 to 50 million pounds, given the challenges you have on your plate? And Emery says, I like Ramsey, but now you're making it my money. I don't like him 40 to 50 million worth. He's not even necessarily a starter for me at the moment, because I haven't found a system that works for it. I like this idea of us pressing up front, which we started in the first couple of games, with Ramsey at the 10 spot and Ozil to the right. That was in my PowerPoints from the summer when I convinced them I had a plan, but it's not going very well. So now I'm not quite sure how I'm going to use Aaron Ramsey. I don't like him in the pivot. I have other players who can play on the right wing. That's not, while I see him as a very useful squad player and potentially a key player for me, I'm not convinced, and that's not how I'm spending my $40 to $50 million or pounds. And they backed off it. And Sanlehi says, right, well, there's 2 votes saying we're not convinced this is how we'd spend our money, and I'm extremely convinced. And Sven Mislintat has much better ways to spend $40 to $50 million in wages or pounds. And kind of how it came about, but it doesn't look good, and I don't think we've done the right. I think if either Gazidis or Wenger were around, Ramsey wouldn't be saying that he felt disrespected by the fact that nobody even bothered to explain it to him. But I think that's very much a different topic to Arsenal fucking up, losing all this revenue, getting this far into this season. And screwing up another transfer, and just not handling their business well. I think those are 2 very, very separate things, though a lot of people in defending the club against Ramsey's accusations go to, well, he delayed and he wanted more money. Well, that's called negotiation. We're the club that delays more than anybody else in negotiations, and we're not famous for throwing cash at players. So it was just that piece is pretty clean for me. They were negotiating however long it took, whatever the amounts were. Doesn't mean you can't sit down with a player who's been at the club for a decade, more than helped us win 2 FA Cups, has been nothing but class and quality. I mean, they all look at their options, but you never see anything about him being a bit of a whore in the headlines, flirting with other clubs.
Not to mention coming back from a horror challenge that, could have derailed a lot of other careers, did derail a lot of other careers.
Yeah, he's never been anything. I mean, he's boring in his interviews.
Good. That's good,
He's the ultimate professional, always puts it all out there. So it wouldn't have taken much to sit down with him for 15 minutes and say, we don't have a great explanation, but, this is it. We're going to give you everything we got as to why we're making the decision we have. We need fullbacks. We need youth. Our age profile's off. We love you, but we don't love you 40 to 50 million. We're just going to have to stick a fork in it.
Look, at some point, if a club keeps doing things poorly, it's a poorly run club. And Arsenal, when it comes to buying and selling, is a poorly run club. Arsenal has bought players that are old when they needed players that are young, that will have no resale value. They have watched resale value erode on players who should have been sold to recoup a fee. They've committed huge wages to players that are probably on the wrong end of the age curve, and while good, maybe don't warrant the wage they've given, and by doing so set a precedent that will make it challenging for them to re-sign players in the future. All in all, the club has been a mess when it comes to contracts, when it comes to selling, and to some extent when it comes to squad building strategy. And what worries me here is you keep walking away from 40 or 50 million pound fees at a club that has to be self-sustaining, and eventually you find yourself behind the 8 ball. I read off those sales figures, and Spurs have made more, City have made more, Chelsea have made more, Liverpool have made more, and United have made more. Now, there's some caveats there, right? I mean, you've got 50 million pound David Luiz swaps for Chelsea to PSG and some weird shit like that. And obviously, if you can buy players for 60 million and sell them for 40 million, it looks like you're making a lot of money selling, but you're losing money. I get some of that. But we have chosen to invest in older players. We have lost out on fees for some younger players. We've mismanaged some of this, and now we have to try to build a title contending team because, oh, by the way, at the end of the day, that's the goal, contend for the title on a budget that's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And this Ramsey business is part of that. He had to be sold. He had to be sold for a fee in the summer, and he wasn't. And if you want to say, well, you can't sell a player who doesn't want to be sold, I'm going to take Tim's point there. He could be sold. If you want to tell me, well, Emery had a right to have 2 games to see him play first, that kind of cavalier attitude towards your assets is just not sustainable. You can't throw away a 40 or 50 million pound fee because you want to give the new coach 2 games to observe the player. And he is the coach. I don't want to put too fine a point on this, but the whole reason we were celebrating getting Diamond Eyes and getting Raul and Ivan sort of being the head of the whole structure was that the structure was supposed to stratify responsibility and have better decisions being made. And it didn't result in this case. Now, I don't want to get hysterical, but I just got hysterical. So there you go. In any event, let's get back to the game. Tim, unless you have sort of final thoughts on that. As we rebuild this club in the post-Wenger era, we know how hard it can be. We see what United have gone through with their unlimited resources trying to do it after Ferguson left. But, these are the kinds of decisions when you don't have a sugar daddy and you don't have United's revenue that you have to start to get right. Is that just fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. And I suppose just to kind of put the finishing point to my point on that as well, with contracts, I got the impression sometimes Arsene Wenger thought a contract was something you did for a nice boy who's been loyal, and it just doesn't work like that anymore. Aaron Ramsey is a nice boy who's been a brilliant player for us. Hopefully he can continue to be so, but selling someone doesn't mean that you hate them or that you think they're shit or that you failed. It's an absolutely fundamental part of life as a second-tier European club. And ultimately, Arsenal made, without player sales, Arsenal would have made £70 million of losses last year. So, and they stand to make something similar this year because they're not in the Champions League. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it is what it is. And by the way, to the people who say, well, Ramsey overplayed his hand, and there's always going to be people that, when choosing between the club and the player, they're going to choose the club. Of course you should choose the club. You're an Arsenal fan. You're not a Ramsey fan. I get that. But I will never begrudge a player trying to get their biggest possible wage. Their careers are short. They're over in their 30s. They have every right to try to make as much money as they can while they have the chance to get it. The club has every right to not fall for it, to win the negotiation. And I don't have a problem with a club dealing harshly with a player any more than I have a problem with a player pushing to get their best deal. So it's not that I'm saying, I'm taking Ramsey's side over the club. I'm saying at the end of the day, Ramsey's job is to do the best for Ramsey, and the club's job is to do the best for the club. And they didn't do it. So it is what it is. We'll have to see how it plays out. This is not a calamity, but at a club that already has a slightly weird squad about it, a lot of more old players that are on big wages, you have a chance to shift an asset for a lot of money and you don't. And that's a problem. So, we'll see what happens. And that kind of problem, by the way, just as a final thought, that's how you wind up having to sell a guy like Torreira at 24. Because now you're behind the 8 ball and he's worth $60 million. And instead of saying, well, we don't need to sell him, you have to sell him because you didn't get the 40 or 50 million for Ramsey. Anyway, so getting back to the game, which seems kind of trite now by comparison. But so, Tim, the referee kind of lost control of this one, I thought. I thought he made a complete mess of it. First of all, the Guendouzi second yellow is absurd, right? That's never a second yellow card for you?
So I think it probably is a yellow because it's quite a deliberate foul. I think there's a question about whether you send a guy. I tend to think you should have to be a real bastard to be sent off. But it's not wrong by the rules. I really would have just given him a talking to and said, right, you're on your last warning.
Yeah. All right. Well, for me, I just don't think he had control of the game. He was letting a lot of bad Blackpool fouls go without cards. There was a lot of weird shit. We did get saved a couple times. The linesman had a shocker late in the match in the second half. He had about 2 or 3 consecutive offside calls wrong on Arsenal. But, well, then, Tim, I'll stay with you just for one more second. The substitutions kind of irked me. Look, you got Liverpool on Saturday. You've been playing 2 games a week for a few weeks now. You just had a week where you had 3 games in, 6 days? We had a tough game against Palace at the weekend, and we've got our toughest game, since Chelsea coming up on Saturday. He brings on Iwobi. I mean, prefer he doesn't, but he does, fine. He brings on Aubameyang. Aubameyang gets 2-footed in a scissored motion from behind. Thankfully comes away with no damage. I mean, for you, I realize you're 2-1 up. You're trying to hold on to a game. You're down a man. But it's Blackpool at home, and it's a competition that you're not going to be measured. Your success this season is not going to be measured on it anyway. Would you have liked to have seen him avoid making those subs, or are you a little more circumspect about it?
I'm slightly more circumspect. It's not what I would have done. But I'm not necessarily expecting Unai Emery to agree with me on that. I thought Torreira, I think that's kind of okay. He didn't really play the first 5 games of the season. Aubameyang spent plenty of time on the bench. Iwobi spent plenty of time on the bench. It's like, in terms of fatigue, I don't think it's a huge issue, although I think you're right. I think against Palace we looked quite leggy. But then again, the players that looked particularly leggy at Palace were the likes of Ozil, and I thought Lacazette looked absolutely shot in the second half, and he didn't get anywhere near the game. So it's not what I'd have done, but I'm not massively exercised about it. And as it happens, Blackpool get the game to 2-1, we're down to 10 men. And actually probably bringing that, I take your point, we should have been able to do it without them anyway, but bringing that level of experience on kind of, put the dampener on Blackpool a little bit.
Yeah, the problem is it's the League One opposition at the Emirates where they're full of adrenaline and they're fighting for the game, when you worry about that kind of cloggers tackle. You know what I mean? The studs up, the kind of League One tackle that can cost you a few weeks of your player being available. So, look, I mean, this is just me. I'm always one who's deathly afraid of our players being on the pitch at all. I wouldn't play them in any game. Just keep them safe. Keep them in the dressing room all the time. But yeah, so maybe it's a little bit of hysterics there again for me. Paul, I mean, do you have a problem with it? Would you have preferred that Torreira and Aubameyang in particular didn't get on?
Aubameyang less so. Torreira is kind of like a single point of failure for us. On the other hand, I understand why, going down to 10 men, he wanted to shore things up in midfield, and looking across the bench, I'm not sure who else he's bringing in apart from Joe Willock, which I guess would have been a reasonable substitution. I don't necessarily have a problem with players playing in these B games, because the more you play, the fitter you are. Yeah, you're open to risk, but if we have other options, I know you don't believe there's another option besides Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, but when there are other options to play, players playing tend to stay fitter longer, so it's a balance. Yeah. So I don't have a huge issue with it. My other issue from the first team that went out is just Lichtsteiner. Unless he's confident he's got 2 full backs, he's literally the only fit full back we have for either wing. And playing him in the first 11. I understand he's also the only fit fullback we have of any note in the B team too. But that's the one where I might have thought, hang on a second, is that a risk too far? We lose him. Who do we have as a fullback against Liverpool?
He must feel pretty good about Bellerin. I mean, he must. The other argument it might make is Lichtsteiner's been so bad that he's like, I need to get this guy more time playing. If I'm going to need him at the weekend. Well, let me ask you this, Paul. I mean, you've sort of a little bit defended Mustafi in that you think his level is reasonably high, but he's just got a Mustafi in him every game or two. Yeah. Again, I thought this was a bad game. And the way he got turned early in the game in his box by a League One striker, I mean, just effortlessly left him for dead.
Bailed out by Lichtsteiner that time. Yep.
And then, the goal they did concede, he doesn't cover himself in glory defending set piece. I mean, for you...
Yeah, but you can see him on that set piece calling to others because he knows he's got 2 or 3 guys he's marking.
No, you're right. Look, I'm not pinning that on him. We can move on because I
thought he was okay.
Well, he gets turned and left for dead. I mean, in a situation where the danger should have been pretty easily cut out. What I'm leading up to here is, do you think that maybe Emery starting him in this game and the performance he had in this game leans towards maybe Socrates and Holding getting the big game start together?
Yeah, maybe. And I wouldn't be heartbroken about that. I like Socrates. I think Holdings actually begun to validate the selection of him. I know there's some question over his distribution, but his distribution, I wouldn't even call it hit and miss. There are games where, he's got it down and he's making good choices. And I think he's still just a bit young. I haven't looked at his numbers, but I don't think he's played a huge number of games for us at a top level. And so I continue to get the vibe from him that he can become the real deal. And I was always a bit skittish on Callum Chambers, much as I love the guy and I actually think he's a pretty good footballer. Just mentally, Holding has the vibe of a true centre-back in terms of his personality. So I can see him becoming the deal. So I would not be upset if what this game meant was Socrates and Holding will start, because as you say, if he was going to protect somebody, he could have protected Mustafi, had Holding play with Pleguezuela, as the French say, who I have to say, I thought he was really good in this game. It's only Blackpool, but I thought he looked the part and I thought he played the part. It's strange that he hasn't got a look in before based on this and based on the positive vibes he gets. He's the captain of the under-23s, Tim will tell me. Yeah. And what's your take on Pleguezuela as we're talking about him?
I don't really watch much of the under-23s anymore, so yeah. I haven't seen much of him at youth level. But I thought he was pretty good. Yeah, he spent, I think, the second half. I can't remember if it was the second half or the whole of last season on loan in Spain. Yeah. I think in the second division. So I mean, he's 21. He's got like a fair amount of football behind him, and I think that showed as well. So yeah, I thought he was perfectly decent.
Well, off topic, but yeah, maybe it means Socrates and Holding for Liverpool.
Yeah. Well, so Tim, let me ask you. I mean, do you think maybe Mustafi's best position at this point, like if we're trying to get the best result with him, is sort of inside and back and down, like inside of a large cannon pointed at the sun?
Yeah, quite possibly. To be honest, I just don't ever see him losing that. I've said it before. He just reminds me of David Luiz. He'll have like 4 or 5 games where you think, yeah, he's actually a really good high level defender, and then he'll do something that makes you think, what are you thinking? So yeah, I think that's maybe an experiment we need to give up on. We can't at the moment, really, because, we can in terms of playing Socrates and Holding, and that's who I'd play, but we can't completely off Mustafi at this point because we need bodies. But I think in the summer that would be, I'd be trying to, raise some cash there to buy another centre half, and I doubt we'd get the 35 million we paid for him back, but maybe if we could, pour some honey in some ears and try and get some money for him, and perhaps try and get the centre back version of Torreira or something, then that would be a good result. Yeah,
and I just don't see how you can trust. I mean, Tim, do you sort of buy my theory that it's great to have like world class, out of this world, incredible defenders like Rafael Varane or something, or Sergio Ramos? Not that anybody likes him, but that you can get by with okay defenders if they don't have that calamitous moment in them. That it reminds me of Almunia in a way. You can be okay with a mediocre goalkeeper if he doesn't do the catastrophically stupid thing. It's always nice to have a De Gea, but Mustafi, much like Almunia to me, just has a comedically, hilariously terrible move in him every game.
Yeah, indeed. I think a decent Arsenal comparison you said about the goalkeeper there was John Lukic in the late 80s. Yeah, John Lukic was a 7 out of 10 goalkeeper. He was nothing special, but he didn't chuck the ball in his own net. Obviously, we were able to upgrade with David Seaman, but so what you're describing there, I mean, it just reminds me of Rob Holding. Like, I don't think Rob Holding has been absolutely outstanding. Yeah, he's been decent. He's been 7 out of 10, which puts him above Mustafi. Like, Mustafi's ceiling is higher. Mustafi's best performances are better than Rob Holding's, but A, they're not that much better, and B, his terrible performances are just too costly.
Yeah, and to me, if anybody cares about just my health, my well-being, my blood pressure, my outbursts on Twitter, my ability to control myself and behave in an emotionally mature way, I think it would be everyone's best interest then if Mustafi was just a little further from the starting 11. Let's turn our attentions before we turn our attentions to Liverpool, the draw was made. It's Spurs at home. This is a tricky one. I mean, Paul, it's a competition that we don't need. It's not a competition that the coach will be measured on. It's not a competition that winning it really gives us anything. I mean, even to the extent that it's a trophy, and you'd always love a trophy, going deep in this competition can actually be an albatross. How do you handle a North London derby in the Carabao Cup? I mean, if you're Emery, do you have the credit banked with the supporters to go with a lineup like this again?
So I guess the problem is we'll be playing them 18th or 19th of December, he says, just looking it up. So that's between a game against Southampton away on the 16th and a home game on the 22nd. So in a very, very busy period. Seems like a very dicey proposition to put too much into. Plus, all it does is get you a double fixture in the semi-finals. Thank you very much. Sometime in February or something. So, it's ugly. I don't know. I think you gotta play the youths more in that game, and they'll probably be playing the youths too, and let the best youths win.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly recommend that. I mean, Tim, do you think the supporters will tolerate that if it doesn't go the right way? I mean, does Emery have the credit in the bank to make that decision, and would you support that decision?
I think he might just about, unless we go into the game in disastrous form. I think Spurs will play a strong team, or a strongish team, just because when you look at their squad, they've only got about 19 players. They don't have a lot of scope to, put out a complete second 11. I think he might mix and match for this one, and to all intents and purposes, we can still put out a really good attack. We can still put out Ramsey, Mkhitaryan, one of Aubameyang or Lacazette, no problem. And not suffer too much because we've got so much room for rotation up there. Danny Welbeck, players like that. And Guendouzi hopefully will be available. So, and actually in defence, we don't have much kind of space to rotate because we're short on numbers back there. But I also don't think it's as important to rotate your centre backs anyway. I don't think they suffer with fatigue quite in the same way. So I think it will be a fairly strong team, but I don't necessarily think it will be what he considers to be his strongest 11. But I think all of the big boys will be involved. It just might be that some of them are on the bench. I think Spurs will play quite a strong team, particularly if they've gone out of their Champions League group. Because I don't think they'll bother too much with the Europa League if they're in that, because I don't think they've got a big enough squad. Whereas this, they might think, yeah, go on, let's, for Spurs, they've got to address a little bit of not so much narrative, but they're in danger of the mood going a bit sour because the stadium's been a fuck up, and they'll have gone out of their Champions League group, and people will be saying, well, where's the progress? And Pochettino, I think what Pochettino said about, winning the domestic trophies has been largely correct. I understand where he's coming from, but he might look at it this time round and think, no, I've got to swing the moodometer here a little bit. So they might consider the League Cup a bit more attractive than they have in the past. Personally, I after last year getting to that final against Manchester City, I used to be relatively enthusiastic about the League Cup, but I think that final against City last year broke me, where I just thought, wow, this has been a massive waste of time. And on a personal standpoint, I won't be able to go to the game. I'll probably be on a plane when it's happening, actually. So
you hardly go anymore anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Well, yeah, I know. So my interest in it is slightly lower.
Yeah, I guess here's the thing. We play Spurs on, the 2nd of December and United the 5th of December. I think depending how those fixtures go might depend on how he handles this, right? If we beat Spurs at the Emirates in the league, I think it buys him the goodwill, especially if we then go and get a result at Old Trafford. It buys him the goodwill to maybe rotate more heavily. But if we've lost to Spurs, lost at Old Trafford, and our league performance is flagging, then I think he kind of has to pay that back in the League Cup, which is unfortunate because I don't think he should, but that might be the situation. So let's turn our attention briefly to the Liverpool match. We don't want to talk too much about it because the really, really good content is going to be Tim's match preview over on Patreon. You don't want to miss it. But for those of you who will not be over there, we want to give you fantastic hashtag content also. So unfortunately, we're going to have Paul talk about it. Paul, this is the first real measuring stick. Right? I mean, so you got two groups of people. You got people who look at the analytics, look at the underlying metrics behind the performances on Project 22, is that what it turned out, and say, really good points haul, unconvincing performances along the way, still trying to determine where we are in the process with Emery. Then you have other people who look at those people and say, you're fucking cunts. We got 22 points out of 24. Take your slide rule and shove it up your ass, nerd. We're fine. We're doing great. Emery in, Emery in, Emery in. So for the people that are still looking to see where we are in the process, I think this is going to be a really important game. For the people who want the slide rules jammed up asses, I would be willing to bet that deep down they kind of know some of the performances haven't been there, and that if this goes sideways on us, they might start to feel a little antsy. So where do you fall on, in that Venn diagram of where you see the process right now?
I guess I'm about to get a slide rule up my ass. No, I'm category
Is it Friday
A.
already? Boom! Yeah.
I don't really understand that. Okay. So yeah, I'm category A. So look, just because we've done really well on the points and the performance hasn't been there, it doesn't mean the manager doesn't get a huge amount of credit, because the mentals are right? We've finished games stronger than we started them. And the points
are banked. You don't have to give them back. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and we've seen before, kind of, we don't want to get all caught up in mentality, but there's definitely a mentality standpoint where people are believing and understand what they're supposed to be doing in general terms, and actually think they'll win games when you come away with more points that maybe the underlying performances might have hinted at. So we get stronger during games and we finish fairly strong. I'm okay with that. I think the manager gets a huge amount of credit compared to last year, and we're winning away from home. I mean, kudos all over the place. The performances, are we Fulham or are we Crystal Palace in terms of our performances? And as you say, Liverpool will be a very good pH indicator of where we're at. We played Chelsea and City way before we were ready to. We should, at least for our midterm reports, be comfortable putting in a solid performance against Liverpool that's reflective of how we've developed. So I think this is a very meaningful game. And we'll have a couple more meaningful games against Spurs and United coming up soon. So we'll have a pretty good indication where we're at that stage that'll go beyond stats and people seeing the world differently.
If anything, I think it could bring those two groups of people, the slide rule people and the people that want to have anal intercourse with the slide rule people, into alignment, because I've gone full Paul here. But because if it's a win, enough, you never go full Paul. If it's a win, I think everyone will be on side, regardless, because winning a big game makes everybody happy, period. If it's a loss, and especially if it's a bad loss, I think the people that weren't in Doubtsville might slide over to Doubtsville a little bit. So Tim, I'm going to ask you two questions that I don't think will step on your toes at all for the preview, because they're inane. So the first question is just, you're at the Emirates, you're around the away supporters, you know what the real humans are thinking, unlike the dirty foreigners like myself. So how much, after getting 22 from 24 points, what's your sense of how precarious the confidence in Emery is? I mean, if this goes poorly on Saturday, do you feel that the Emirates will be quick to turn away from the confidence that was built up? I mean, how precarious is the situation in your mind?
No, I don't think it is at the moment. Maybe a couple, 2 or 3 defeats would really test that. But I think my reading of it is that people really, really want to buy into what Emery is doing. Hence, the "we've got our Arsenal back" chants and things like that. People are, I think seeing things over generously, but I'm kind of fine with that. I'd rather that than the alternative. But so I don't think I think if we were to lose to Liverpool, for example, it would be a reality check, but people wouldn't turn per se.
Yeah. So all right. Well, that's encouraging, because I know I can come across as, what's the word, a twat sometimes, but like, ultimately, I want to believe in this team. I want to believe in this coach. I want to believe that we're going to achieve things together, and I think we have the talent to do it. So, like, it's not that I want to see clouds in every silver lining. It's just that I think it is fair to wonder if this run of 22 points suggests that we're far enough in the process to be up for this kind of challenge. I mean, unfortunately, Liverpool look like they're hitting their stride right now. Their form has been improving. They've been playing really well. Salah is scoring goals again. So, Tim, my second question then, again, not to get too much into the X's and O's of it.
A shithead.
Yeah, I can be. That's what it can be.
A buffoon.
That's what it was. A buffoon. That's right.
A lunatic.
Yes, that's it. A hyena?
Unhinged.
Yep, that too. Do you have
a quisling weasel?
Do you have thesaurus.com open right now? Just be honest.
No, I draw up a short list of adjectives for you for just such occasions.
Or you might have been on my Twitter mentions. So then my second question, Tim, is just putting aside the X's and O's, your expectation from this match, without any gloss, without any veneer, what do you expect to happen on Saturday?
I think it's going to be a draw, actually.
And would you take that?
Yeah, I'd take that. I think that'd be fine. I think we've built up enough of a bank of points against some of the dregs over the last few weeks. I think that would, because basically, not that I think it's absolutely unlikely, but I don't think we are going to win. If you asked me to call a winner, I'd say Liverpool might do it narrowly, but I don't think they've been hugely impressive the last few weeks, but they've been finding a way to win, maybe a little bit like us. But yeah, I think this would be a draw, and I'd be relatively happy with that.
Yeah, I think I would take it. I mean, Paul, here's what's interesting. Just to wrap this up, I think the second half against City and the first half against Chelsea were maybe two of our better performances this season, given the circumstance and the opposition. I think we were good in patches of those games, and I liked some of the things we tried. What's interesting is we had very unique approaches to those games that have not even remotely resembled our approaches to the games subsequently. We've gone very vanilla and very similar since then. And there's a part of me that has wondered, and I've wondered it on this podcast, has Emery just sort of picked a stable, reliable 11 for these quote-unquote easier games and kind of just managed his way through with a very straightforward game plan? But when the big games come up, will we see a total departure from that? Is there a part of you that thinks maybe we will see a significant departure in the lineup, in the tactics, in the system, what we try against Liverpool versus what we saw for Project 24?
Look, that's a really interesting question, which makes me think. And also the fact that, these things people call you about you being a moron and an idiot, when they listen to something like that, maybe that gives them some pause.
The thing is, they stop listening at around 35 minutes. So
okay. So it's a great question. What did the first two games mean versus this one? I tend to think he learned from the first two games and then decided to change how he was going to play generally. But we'll find out against Liverpool. I think he is playing it safer, a bit more vanilla. I don't think he can then just suddenly change it around against Liverpool and play a different style that he hasn't even attempted to play against lesser teams. I mean, why not play a more, for example, pressing with the front four style if that's what you're going to look to do against a Liverpool when they show up? So it would seem awfully brave to kind of play possum for that many games in a style and then suddenly decide you're going to do it totally different against Liverpool. So I expect to see more of the same. I haven't seen the pressing I was looking for in the front four Doesn't seem to be something we're looking to do. What we do seem to do is we keep things compact all up the spine. We're not very wide. The width only comes from the full backs. So, and with the high energy levels and the high work rates, we get in a lot of tackles. We get in a lot of action, busyness upfield without it truly being a press as such. And I think he's just going to continue to use that against Liverpool. I think we're going to fight the midfield. It was interesting to see Guendouzi against Palace in the midfield. I actually thought the two boys did really well in terms of the fight. I thought they got the upper hand in terms of midfield. Liverpool is going to be a whole other battle, and without Guendouzi, it's going to be back to Torreira and Xhaka, which is probably best overall. But they're going to have their hands full, so they're going to need somebody dropping into that midfield to help them out as a third player. So he definitely has a choice on his hands, but I think in terms of style, I don't think he has two styles that he was planning to flip between. I think this is his fallback position, and he was planning to keep it going forward.
Yeah, I can totally see the logic behind that, and it makes total sense. And yet, I think we're going to see a totally different approach for the Liverpool game than we've seen for the last 9 or 10.
Interesting.
I think he'll approach it completely differently, and I kind of think he has to. I don't think you can do what we
probably agree with that bit.
Yeah. Well, and look, we can agree on this.
There.
If he doesn't have Bellerin and Monreal or Bellerin and Kolasinac or whoever it is, he's in deep shit. And then he's going to have trouble because Salah and Mane are going to rip us apart. I almost wonder if he would tell Torreira to man mark Firmino, because when Firmino drops into that false 9 position sort of in front of the center backs and pulls their attention there, it opens up all kind of space for those two to run in behind. And I don't trust any of our center backs to handle that situation too well, especially if our full backs are up the pitch. So I would like to see someone right in Firmino's face all game long so he can't collect the ball deeper, turn, and play in the runners. We'll see what happens. I'm looking forward.
Losing Guendouzi really limits his options.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it really does. I think we will play differently, and I'll be curious to see if that happens. And, any way you slice it, I have said this before. Look, this is not a perfect Arsenal team. It is a flawed Arsenal team. But there's a lot of talent in this team, and I don't think any team in England, with the possible exception of City, should be able to just play us off the pitch, especially our own pitch. And I don't think Liverpool are good enough to play us off our pitch. So I expect it to be a good match, and I expect us to be in it. Whether or not it's enough for us to get a result, I think will heavily depend on who's available at fullback, and and how we look in front of goal, because we'll get a couple of chances. We're going to have to take them. So we'll see what happens. Again, I'm excited to listen to and watch Tim's match preview on Patreon, because that will really be far superior than anything we've just done on this podcast. In any event, we're going to leave it there. That's a lot of talk for a midweek Carabao Cup game. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Paul's on Twitter at Pause in My Pants. Thanks, Pause.
Woohoo!
Tim's on Twitter at Stroberto. Tim, such a pleasure to have you back.
My pleasure as always.
Yeah. So once again, the winner of the shirt, if you missed it, earlier, we announced it. It's Alan Wayne. Alan, we will be emailing you. We'll have additional shirt competitions in the future. So if you didn't win, and if your name's not Alan Wayne, you didn't win, there'll be a chance to win in the future. We'll have our new exciting sponsor starting next week, so listen for that. We'll come back with a podcast after the Liverpool match. So big game. It's fun. I'm excited for it. It's been a while. And, we've been on this good run, and hopefully the team is now ready to take another important step forward in the process. So, up the Arsenal, everybody. We're excited to talk to you after the match. We might come to you with a halftime game then. But until then, halftime show. You know what I mean. Anyway, my name's Elliot Smith. Block me on Twitter. Give us a 5-star review. Write nasty things about Scott and Clive. We'll talk to you after Arsenal 10, Liverpool